Hi, welcome to Soul Conversations. I'm Melissa Maxx. I'm an author and a life coach. And this is a platform where we have conversations with thinkers and writers and authors about personal development and spirituality and personal growth, all the good stuff. And today I'm really happy to be talking to Andre Solo. He's one of the co-authors, along with Janet Graneman, of the book Sensitive: The Hidden Power of the Highly Sensitive Person in a Loud, Fast, Too Much World. If you're a highly sensitive person or a highly sensitive cat, I'm sure you can relate. Andre is also the co-founder of the website Sensitive Refuge. It's the world's largest website for sensitive people. So I'm super excited to talk to him because I too am a highly sensitive person and I love finding fellow tribe members. So let's get started. All right. So first of all, I'm really excited to talk to you. I was excited to read the book. It's always really nice to talk to like-minded people, to find like-minded people. I want to start. I mentioned that you look very nice before we started recording. I'm wearing my highly sensitive uniform. I've got fuzzy socks on. I've got elastic waist on, and I've got my time spent with books and cats is never wasted t-shirt on.
I was going to say books and cats. I love them both. So that's perfect. Yeah.
I got to say that the lockdown and the pandemic, when people started wearing comfortable clothes all the time, great for highly sensitive people. Like that, there was one good thing that came out of the pandemic.
Absolutely.
So the book was fascinating. I didn't know I was highly sensitive, or there wasn't a thing called a name for highly sensitive. I always knew that I was a little bit different and I perceived things a little different and I responded a little differently than other people. And then in 2015, I saw the movie Sensitive. I actually just got goosebumps as I was saying that because I'm sensitive. But it was such an eye-opening experience for me. It was so validating and so empowering. And I realized, oh my God, I'm not broken or crazy, or this is a thing. A big percentage of the population has it. I imagine a big chunk of people who are watching this are highly sensitive people. But for people who are not, can you just tell a little bit about what high sensitivity is, what percentage of the population it affects?
Absolutely. Yeah, no problem. So I think when we hear the word sensitive, I think a lot of us think of something bad. We think of like being weak or soft or maybe overreacting to things, like that kind of thing. And that is just not what sensitive means. As a personality trait, being sensitive means that you process all information much more deeply than other people do. So sensitive people are actually wired at a brain level to process information more deeply, which means that they tend to spend more time processing information. They tend to think things through very thoroughly and kind of sift through a lot of details that most people kind of just filter out and ignore, which means comes with a lot of strengths, right? That means that you tend to be a very deep thinker. It means you tend to notice things others don't. You can see connections between ideas. You pick up on details that others miss. It tends to mean that you're very creative, and it also means that you have a very high empathy because you tend to notice a lot of emotional cues from other people that not everyone might notice. And so when you see it that way, it's actually a very powerful trait. Being sensitive is a great strength, but of course it does come with strong emotions as well, and it also means that you tend to need to think things through a lot before you make a decision or take action.
It's interesting that you talk about sort of the physical and emotional components. I have historically been teased by my friends because I won't eat certain foods because I don't like the texture. And my mother just found my baby book, which she kept for the first year of my life. And at 6 months old, it said, Melissa has to touch everything. And if she doesn't like the way it feels, she won't eat it. And fast forward decades later, I'm still the same. But again, that was really validating. It's not me being picky or a diva or difficult. Food was a big battle for me. My mother would serve me milk. I would go to drink the milk and I would say the milk is spoiled. It's bad. She'd smell it, not bad. My brother, not bad. Sure enough, the next day the milk would have been spoiled.
That early stage that everyone else just didn't notice.
So we tend to think of it as, oh, sensitive emotionally, which is, as you said, is part of it, but it is so many other things as well.
But you said that actually about the milk because I often think of like the perfect example of a sensitive person is if you've seen the movie Ratatouille. So the main character is a rat named Remy, and he has such a sensitive palate for taste and such a sensitive nose that he can't eat the garbage that all his other rat family members like to eat. He's just, oh
Outcast.
no. And they hate it. They pick on him all the time until they realize he can smell rat poison and they can't smell it. So they would bring him everything, let him smell it first, and he would tell them what's safe to eat. So it turned out to be this great strength. And of course, Remy goes on to become a great chef as well, because he's very creative and all these other great traits of being a sensitive person. So, but you're right. Yeah, the physical and the sensitive, some sensitive people might lean one way or the other, more emotionally inclined or more physically inclined, but they really are two different sides of the same trait. So much so that if you take, we found this out in the studies, that if you take a Tylenol to numb a physical headache, you'll actually score lower on an empathy test until the drug wears off.
So numbing is dulling senses is.
Yeah, if you process one kind of information more deeply, it's going to be everything across the board.
Again, I love this. Once I heard about a high sensitivity, I called it the missing puzzle piece in my life. I suddenly understood myself so much better and got super excited about it. And really, this sounds weird to say, but started really liking myself. The things I thought were, again, flaws are superpowers, as you just said about Ratatouille and other things. It's really empowering. And semantics is a big thing. You said better than sensitive. You like the word responsive. I like that, receptive and responsive. Can you sort of talk about that and what the difference is? I know it's just words, but it's not just words.
Right. And I do like the word sensitive as well. I think it's a really beautiful word, and it's something that I think a lot of us can relate to the good side of as well. But of course, it has that baggage of being used to mean a bad thing. But really, if you're sensitive, it means that you're more responsive to your environment. So anything that happens around you, you tend to pick up more information about it. You tend to process it more deeply. You notice things others don't, and then you respond more. So you might actually do more with that information than others might. So that means a stronger emotional response, but it also means oftentimes a more thoughtful response as well. And sensitive people tend to be better at decision makers. We've actually found this both in humans and in other primates, in monkeys. That the sensitive individuals, as determined by having the genes that correlate with sensitivity, tend to perform better on a variety of cognitive tasks, including predicting outcomes for things and decision making.
And you labeled that in the books as perceiving information from the senses, and then the second level is thinking about information and finding connections that other people might not find. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
It happens unconsciously, right? It's all one process, but it really kind of happens in two parts. So it's not that sensitive people have super senses, right? You don't have super vision or super hearing or a super nose. You have the same equipment as everybody else. But most people, their brains try to be as efficient as possible. They err on the side of efficiency. So lots of details coming in just get filtered out before they ever even make it to your conscious awareness. And sensitive people seem to do a little bit less of that. So more details are brought through, and that means it gives you more information to think about. It can mean sitting with your feelings longer. It can mean ruminating on something. It can mean kind of like pondering and finding connections. It can mean comparing that new experience or that new thing you just learned to a bunch more previous experiences or a bunch of other things that you know than somebody else might. So it takes a lot of different forms, but we see that actually even in brain scans, that there is more activity in a variety of areas of the brain when sensitive people are shown something, for example, an image on a screen, than other people have in their brains.
It's funny, when I read the part about the difference in MRIs, again, validating, because science proves it's real. It's a real thing. There are physical differences. As much as we're talking about it now, it's sort of hard to explain to people who don't understand it that this is a real thing. You had mentioned the aspirin. I think something that's not often discussed, but a lot of my clients are highly sensitive. I think often there's a lot of numbing, whether it be substance abuse or binge watching TV. A lot of people numb just to give themselves a break. The downside of that, of course, is as you numb the too much information, you're also sort of cutting yourself off from your superpower. But can you talk a little bit about sensory overload for the highly sensitive person?
Yeah, absolutely. So now we're kind of getting into the cost of being sensitive, right? There's many strengths, so creativity, empathy, deep thinking, better decision making, et cetera. But there is a cost to this particular, and not every gift has a cost, but this one does. So the cost of being sensitive is overstimulation. And it happens because there's no on-off switch for a sensitive person to say, oh, today I'm not going to process information so deeply. Do it. No, it's like, no, any situation you're in, your brain is wired where it's going to take more time, spend more resources and more mental energy, you could say, on processing everything coming in. Now, that's fine if you're in a quiet space with only a few people focusing on something, and it's not that stressful of a day. But once you're in a chaotic space, it's really crowded, really loud, lots going on around you, lots of things are coming at you all at the same time. You have to switch between different tasks. You can't focus on something. And maybe you're also stressing out about a fight you just had with your partner at the same time. All of that is a lot for the brain to go deep on. It can't go deep on all of it. And so it gets farther and farther behind. It feels more and more overloaded. You're burning through more and more of your mental resources. And you hit this point where you become overstimulated or experience sensory overload. And what that feels like can vary, but it usually takes the form of fatigue, brain fog, sometimes physical aches like a headache or muscle aches. It can start to come out as anxiety or just this vague feeling that like you're scared and you're not sure why, almost a panicky feeling. And it can also start to come out as getting snappy at other people or just not being able to keep functioning at doing what you're doing. But it is something that all sensitive people have to take into account. And it's why sensitive people are often mistaken for introverts. Sensitive and introverted are not the same thing.
It's funny. That was going to be my next question. So I worked in radio. I was a radio DJ for many years. So I talked on the radio and I was outgoing and I got on stage and I would tell people I'm an introvert. They thought I was insane, but I didn't have the language to say what I was. I could be really social, but then my friends knew I would say goodbye and they wouldn't see me for a month because I literally had to just disconnect.
Right.
All the other DJs would be listening to the music really loud and dancing around the studio. And I'm sure they thought I was, affected in some way or being a diva, but people would laugh because they'd walk in the studio. I had the lights down, the music down. I was barefoot and, they were probably rolling their eyes like, oh, this hippie girl. I wasn't doing it for any reason except that is how I had to be.
Control the stimulation. Yeah, I love that.
So introvert, highly sensitive, different. Can we also talk about, I was scribbling as I was reading. Sure. So I like that you brought that up because I wrote down, what's the difference between highly sensitive, introvert, neurodivergent, and now there's a whole thing with empaths. Can you sort of differentiate all four of those things?
Yeah, for sure. So we kind of talked about being sensitive and being an introvert versus an extrovert. So as far as neurodivergent, right? So this is a kind of a general category that just means your brain in some way functions differently than the average or typical brain. And different people like to use this word differently. So if you're only including things that are diagnosed as disorders in neurodivergency, then technically being sensitive is not neurodivergent because it's considered a healthy, normal temperament trait that everyone is either low, average, or high sensitive, and anywhere on that continuum is normal, about 30% being highly sensitive. But if you take a broader view of what neurodivergent means and don't just, define it in terms of disorders, which is sometimes misleading, if you just say, well, but does somebody's brain function differently than the most common, the kind of the mainstream, the average or typical brain, then yes, sensitive people are neurodivergent. So it's a whole kettle of fish, but they're all different things.
It's interesting. There is commonality, but there are distinct differences as well. When did you realize you were highly sensitive?
Oh, so that's such a fun question. So a lot of people realize it at a young age, even if they don't have the word for it yet. I did not. I was an adult, and it wasn't until I started researching this topic. And of course, I've been sensitive my entire life, but I didn't want to say that about myself. And I remember I was in kindergarten, which is kind of the first like real school experience someone has, right? And I did fine in class. Class was fine. But then we would get to recess, everyone else's favorite part of the school day. And suddenly I'm outside with hundreds of kids who are running every direction, yelling, throwing stuff, laughing, fighting sometimes, and it's chaos and it's loud. And all I knew as a little 5-year-old or 6-year-old or whatever was I got to get out of here. So I would go and hide. And the only place I could find to hide was this storm sewer opening at the edge of the school property. Which, by the way, like these days would probably be completely covered up. It was not at the time.
I was going to say, are you Gen X, but you're not, right? You're
I'm an elder millennial. Yeah. So
okay.
it's probably actually
Yeah,
late
we were playing in storm sewers, Gen X, as we drank out of the hose. So yes.
80s. Yeah, exactly. So I would go and hide, and that was, I came back at the end of recess. So for a while it was fine because nobody realized what I was doing. It's just he's here when the bell rings. And eventually the teacher was like, where does that kid go? And when they figured out, that was a big issue. And that was the first time that I realized. And they were just like, why would you do this?
And you
And
can't
that was the first
explain
time
it, right? There's no,
I
there's
was like,
no,
it's just quiet.
yeah.
Well, what? Yeah. And it was like, oh, that's when I realized I'm different. And I sort of had this idea then throughout my childhood and adolescence that like that part of myself, which I now know as being sensitive, I needed to hide and like stuff down as far as possible and not let anyone see it. And really denied it even to myself until I was an adult and I started, because I was previously doing research on other things related to psychology. And when I came upon this term, highly sensitive, and started digging into it, it's like,
light
oh,
bulb, right?
and that's me, and that's me, and that's me. Yeah.
There is, without even realizing it, I think I felt a lot of shame about who and what I was intrinsically. And it's not like I was overtly shamed. I just knew I was different. And again, your book, Sensitive, the movie in 2015, just like you, like, like this is fantastic. This makes sense. You take that shame and it's a source of pride now, the thing that you were ashamed of. So it's so cool. There's some sections in the book where people sort of give their personal experiences. How would you explain like what high sensitivity feels like if you're talking to someone who's not familiar with it?
I've heard it explained a lot of ways by different sensitive people, and there's a lot of beautiful images that they'll use. For me personally, it's as if the volume is turned up louder on the world for me than it is for everyone else. And not just the volume of sound, but like the brightness of color, the importance of emotions, the obviousness of little details, the itchiness of this blah, 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 every kind of detail, it's almost as if they're more saturated for the sensitive person and stand out more, which can be this wonderful, beautiful experience. And it can also just be like, God, why can't we turn down the volume on this world?
I describe it as I feel like I'm wearing my nerve endings on the outside.
Oh, I love that. Yes.
So it's just, you feel, and again, that's great when you're watching a sunset or listening to music or even this conversation, I'm getting the chills again. So it can be a wonderful thing, but it can also be an extremely overwhelming thing and draining thing and even painful thing sometimes. So, but I think sort of drawing these pictures with words is a great way to help people who are not highly sensitive, or parents who have highly sensitive children, or friends of highly sensitive people. It can kind of help them understand a little more. So the book is called Sensitive, the Hidden Power of the Highly Sensitive Person in a Loud, Fast, Too Much World. Before I let you go, talk about your website, Sensitive Refuge. I didn't even know there was a website, but I will be joining right after we get off of this call.
Yeah, absolutely. So sensitiverefuge.com is the world's largest website now for sensitive people, which is amazing. The co-author of the book, Jen, and I co-founded Sensitive Refuge, I want to say 2017, maybe. It has hundreds, if not thousands, at least hundreds of writers who are sensitive people. Many of them are researchers, many of them are therapists, many are just regular, everyday sensitive people who have a story to tell. And it's become a great resource. And there is a test on the site as well you can take to find out if you're a highly sensitive person.
Ooh, I love a good test. I mean, I know what the answer is going to be, but I'm going to definitely.
It's still fun to take. Yeah.
And how did you and the co-author, Jen, did you know each other before? How did you find each other?
Prior to this, we both did work related to introverts, and we didn't know each other, but we had a friend in common.
Of course not, because you were introverts. So
you never, right? So we had a friend in common who did podcasts, and he wanted to produce a podcast about introverts, but he's an extrovert. So he thought, okay, Jen would be a perfect host, and Andre would be a perfect host. And he put us together on a call to talk about this podcast. The podcast never happened, but we hit it off and started working together and doing all kinds of great things. And that led to Sensitive Refuge. So
I love that synchronicity. That's awesome. All right, Andre, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. I'm going to go check out the website. And again, the book, Sensitive, the Hidden Power of the Highly Sensitive Person in a Loud, Fast, Too Much World, is out now. Thank you very much.